bibliotekos direktoriau, mėly užsienio svečiai, gausų susirinkusieji. Aš iš organizatorių kvietimo iš mielos Romos Urvilėnės, kurią pažįstu nuo pat asociacijos steigimo metų, supratau, kad pranešimą reikia skaityti angliškai. Tai jums leidus, kadangi yra sinchroninis vertimas, pereisiu prie anglų kalbos. O šiaip, kol dar kalbu lietuviškai, labai dėkoju už pakvietimą. Esu dabar tranzite, įvardytos mano pareigos priartėjo prie pabaigos. Aš labiau artėju nuo UNESCO prie Lietuvos ir su tuo yra susijus turbūt dalis dalykų, kuriuos paminėsiu savo kalbėjime. Hello everyone. It's really wonderful to see this hall full in a renovated library. It took many years, as we all know who participated in this, and it's symbolic and very good that this conference is taking place in one of our main cultural institutions in Lithuania. As director mentioned, library is a melting pot of educational, intellectual, cultural activities, and it's really good luck that we could finish the renovation in 8 years. I think it took us. Yes. So it's consoling that Egyptian pyramids were built in a longer time. So it's also symbolic that this conference is organized by National Association of Creative and Cultural Industries. 8 years ago, in 2008, I think it was autumn, this organization, this association was launched by a group of like-minded people in a very artistic and spontaneous way, not very far away from this place, in an art gallery, which makes us constantly think that artistic creativity and artists, they lie in the very center of creative processes, and they, in a way, they form the nucleus of culture. Ladies and gentlemen, let me greet you here in Vilnius, and let me wish you peace and prosperity, as I'm coming from UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, which also includes communication and information, more and more, safety of journalists, human rights. And I chose to wish you peace and prosperity for 2 reasons. Peace, of course, as we are living in turbulent times, lots of violence, increasing military activities. Especially this is visible when you reside in an organization with more than 200 members, when you have to deal with destruction of heritage, when you have to deal with restitution of cultural property that is, taken by one country from another, and then we have processes of restitution, and UNESCO has convention on that. But I also wish you prosperity, because this term is exactly what I'm going to deal in my presentation. I think it is a very ambiguous and unclear notion. It is, when we say I wish you prosperity, everyone understands in his or her own terms. And when we say that culture needs to participate and needs to add to progress, to sustainable growth, to prosperity, I think it is one of the misunderstandings that arises here, that we understand prosperity and progress in different way. And it is always very comforting to speak in the audience of the like-minded people, like it is the case today. We all gathered for culture, we are believers in culture, we are convinced that culture, as was the poster on the screen, equals sustainable development, or is a driver and enabler in sustainable development, as we used to say in UNESCO, increasingly those days. I remember driving one well-known American art historian in the streets of Vilnius, and we got stuck in the traffic jam. He looked through the window, it was his first visit to Lithuania, and he said, "Oh, I see, progress means more cars." And in a way, it could be one of the definitions of progress. More cars for everyone, each family having several, but of course we have to pay for this with traffic jams, with increasing difficulty with parking, garages, parking lots, some extra building activities, and so on and so on. To many, progress means exactly more cars, bigger houses, faster production, and more money. But I'm quite free to use such a sarcastic or I think it is a rather ironic and simplistic definition of prosperity in this room, because people in this room, they are, in most cases, would be opposed to such a definition. Mentioning this room and speaking in particular context, I think it is very important to define in which context we are considering culture and sustainability. If we are talking in the context of researchers, it is one thing. Then we need to define concepts, research the various ways the culture can operate for sustainability, and we publish papers. This is a very important activity. It's just one of the aspects. If we deal with culture practitioners, creative individuals, enterprises, and culture managers, it would be another play. Policy makers, still the other. And governmental sector, ministries, parliaments, laws dealing about the financial situation of the culture, activists or culture people involved in culture jobs is completely the other. And I'm looking at the Minister of Culture. He is my successor. I used to be in this position 4 years ago. And when we talk, when we share our experiences, it's more or less exactly the same perspective, exactly the same challenges. And I will try to mention the three contexts that I had to confront this difficulty or the challenge of inscribing culture in the strategic documents of development, strategic documents of countries or societies' well-being. And it has been in the academic context when I was a vice rector of the Art Academy. And it was at this time that we launched the Association of Creative and Cultural Industries, and we wrote a strategic document called the Creative and Cultural Industries of Lithuania. This comprised 3 or 4 universities having art studies. And we had to convince the Ministry of Education, first of all, and other ministries that culture has something to do with development. It is worthwhile to invest in culture, and it's worthwhile to treat cultural industries as part of academic discipline and as a direction in research. Believe me, this was not easy. We had waves of optimism. We had various discussions at various points, but at many instances we were asked by the specialists just in the middle of the day. They say, but please tell me, what culture has to do with research, because it is about emotions. It is about free time, it is about uninterested play. It is not research-based. It is something that you practice in your leisure time. It is not, in a way, a legitimate part of the academic world. And at the same time, we were traveling to to the neighboring countries, Finland first of all, to Aalto University, which was not Aalto University at that time, it was University of Art and Design before consultations. We saw that in a way the situation is a little bit similar, but the government of the Nordic countries, they are treating arts and culture in the picture of the general development scheme rather differently. And I'm saying this also because we are having this Nordic-Baltic discussion, and we can compare our experiences. Finally, this project was launched, but it was anything but easy. And in particular, we need to, with the statistical agencies, and we needed to gather data to convince that culture contributes to growth. And in 2008 or 2009, such data simply didn't exist in the Lithuanian statistical system. There were no tools to capture, to reveal culture's influence in the general economical or societal, not to speak environmental agenda. I'm sorry, can I have a little water? Culture is not an easy business. We need to water from time to time. Exactly, and I remember when I was in the studies committee together with other vice presidents, academic vice presidents of the universities, culture was art academy and music academy. They were always treated as some exceptional cases, so to speak. Yes, you are in the academic system, you are participating in building the future of Lithuania, but in a way, you are such an exceptional and strange case, talking about research, what you can offer. Of course, I will not mention artistic research, the whole new area that was only growing at that time. And now I believe it is in a quite solid position in the academic world. We have first doctorates in arts, we have artistic PhDs, but in 2008, 2009 it was just forming, and it was rather unclear how arts and culture, if you want in general sense, can contribute to research. Exactly the same happened when we already on the governmental level in 2009-2012 we're preparing a strategic document, Lithuania 2030, delineating the development of the state for the next 20 years. And after lots of discussions and negotiations, after writing chapter after chapter, we had one stage, like half year left, the elements of culture completely disappearing from that document. And I remember Prime Minister, during the presentation of the launching of this project, said we need to ask ourselves a question: how did it happen that culture disappeared from the strategic document 2030? This mistake was corrected afterwards. Of course, some chapters on culture and urban planning, culture and education, culture for health, culture and many other aspects, they were inscribed later. But what I want to say is just the difficulty to explain in public discourse, in the mainstream political discourse and in the mainstream policy formation discourse, the role of culture for sustainable development and for development as such. The the only period of my experience, personal experience, which was more comforting is those last 4 years in UNESCO, where of course all the agenda is formed around culture and education, which are main pillars. Of course, UNESCO's conventions dealing with world heritage, both natural heritage and cultural heritage, as well as intangible heritage. They are world famous. Everybody wants to get on the list. Convention on protection of creative expressions, diversity of cultural expressions is getting increasingly famous. And in a way, in a similar way to this room, people who gather in the hall to discuss various aspects of culture's role, they are like-minded people. They need not to be convinced. And of course, the context changes when they come back home to their governments, to general policy debates, when they need to position culture again in the general picture of developmental policies. Now, the newest example is with the 17 SDGs. We use this term without ever explaining what it is, but for those who are not so well versed in the United Nations newspeak or abbreviations, it is Sustainable Development Goals. The agenda, the Sustainable Development Agenda of the 2015 that was adopted after long discussions, long difficult discussions in various global fora, that for the first time ever, for the first time after United Nations were created, the word culture and cultural diversity is mentioned in that document. And our director of UNESCO, DG Irina Bokova, states that for the first time at the global level, the recently adopted UN Sustainable Development Agenda for 2030 acknowledges the key role of culture, creativity and cultural diversity to solving sustainable development challenges. I think it doesn't. I'm very sorry. But in this group of like-minded people, I think we need to face reality and we need to face challenges. It mentions culture in 2 chapters. It mentions culture in 2 SDGs. But if you see all the 17 goals, you will not find a word for culture. You will find very important things mentioned. You will find poverty, eradication of poverty, clean water, sustainable cities, the key role for education, and many other things. But the separate goal for culture doesn't exist. It exists in 2 cases. In Goal 4, ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So this is the educational SDG. And it mentions in the target 4.7, by 2030, ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and non-violence, global citizenship, and finally we reach the part of the sentence at the very end, which says, and appreciation of cultural diversity and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. Which exactly reminds me of the way we wrote Agenda 2030 for Lithuania. It is only at the end of the sentence, it is only at the end of the chapter, it is only and mentioning culture that culture finally has made its way to the strategic document, which is of paramount importance because all the governments of the world have, they have agreed, they signed this document and it has to be implemented. So at least through education we have culture mentioned and we have cultural diversity mentioned. Then again, goal number 11, which deals with cities and human settlements, saying that we need to make them more inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable, says in target number 11.4. Strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. So this is to say explicitly stated that cultural and natural heritage preservation has to be one of the main targets if we are in a position to build a sustainable future. I remember the way to these two sentences or to these two mentionings. We had discussions and discussions, conferences and conferences. We had people traveling to New York. We had people coming back to Paris telling us news. They say culture is not yet there, but we still have hope. We still lobby. We still believe that culture should be on this agenda. And I wasn't going to mention my, say, biographical facts, but indeed this is so resonating with what I experienced both in the academic world and the political, on the national plane, that it raises many questions. What is the notion of prosperity again? What is the notion of development? What do we imagine as being a good life? Can for some people or for many people good life be imagined without culture in it, or without artistic activities, without, say, cultural notions and culture being as an enabler of identity and to say, strengthening the feeling of belonging and what's the way out. I was very surprised this year to read in a magazine that deals with anything but culture. Of course, it has a couple of articles in every issue on jazz, on some exhibitions, but its main focus is economy, to find the special issue dedicated exactly on the issue that I'm mentioning here in my presentation. It is called the prosperity puzzle, and it is the Economist, how to say, neoliberal direction economical magazine of UK, which has very high quality analysis, covers all financial fluctuations of oil prices, politics. And they are presenting a very good article on what is prosperity and how increasingly difficult it is to measure prosperity by the means that we are used to, by the means that we Google the GDP of the country and we know exactly in which phase of development this country is. And this is a rather old story. This GDP race has been launched almost immediately after World War II. You can imagine that in order after war to get the Marshall Aid from the United States, you needed to fill a template for GDP. So, having a GDP, being on the GDP list, it almost equaled to be a nation. If you are not on the GDP list, you are not quite a country. So I think this paramount importance of GDP and what it means and how it is achieved and how culture can contribute to building this GDP was a very traumatic question for the many of us. And here comes the salvation, here comes the release from the economical side. Because as I said, if we talk among culture researchers and culture managers and culture people, it is one thing. So we all love culture, we believe in culture, we cannot live without culture, and we believe that any country cannot go any further without without wonderful libraries, without operas, without people dancing, without young people playing in the rock bands and the jazz bands, without literature, good poetry, and so on. But at least in Lithuania, when you pronounce this inspirational speech to the economical side of society, to finance people, to economical ministry people, they would say, as Mr. Minister mentioned here, but culture, it absorbs resources, it doesn't give anything back. So it is consuming a lot. You know, renovation of library, building opera house, building concert halls, launching festivals is very costly. So how to prove, by which instruments to prove that actually it is exactly the other way around? It was calculated, I think 4 or 5 years ago. We participated in a research project financed by the World Intellectual Property Organization. I think statistically what we saw is that cultural sector contributes to GDP in Lithuania also as much as the milk industry, which is very important in Lithuania as well. We are very much milk people. Cheeses, lots of cows, at least it used to be this kind of thing. So, but for non-believers, even if you present those numbers, they do not work in the way they should. You cannot, in a way, base your observations on statistical data, because they say, well, still monitoring of cultural input is very, very blurry, and those indicators that you are presenting us, they are sort of not very convincing. How you calculate, how many people in the cinema, how many people attending libraries. It is all quantitative data. And we know that in culture, many of the things, they go on more on quality and intangible evaluations rather than figures and strict numbers. There was also a quotation as early as in the late 1960s. Robert Kennedy said about the GDP that GDP-based notion of prosperity which measures advertising and jails, but does not capture the beauty of our poetry or the strength of our marriages. This was said by Robert Kennedy in the United States in the late 60s. But I cannot see a lot of progress after that. And I really hope that we are actually in the situation where The Economist magazine is publishing an article questioning GDP, saying that in order to get a clear and concise picture of what sustainable society is, of which direction it should take, they acknowledge the uncertainty and imperfections of the economical instruments to measure those things. And they say we are sort of trying to catch a moving target. We are trying to measure the things such as, for instance, free internet services that are not reflected in the GDP. If you are downloading music or films or visual images, and they give you enormous inspiration, and even as educational materials, they give you enormous push. But this doesn't reflect in the GDP tables. It doesn't show you what kind of impact, what kind of, to say, positive development aid culture does. The notion of sustainable development, as we all know, next year we are going to celebrate the 30th anniversary of the notion itself, as it was launched in 1987 by the UN document named Our Common Future. And sustainable development was say, defined as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. This is very general again. This is very general, and it is very difficult to see the role of culture in it. But I think we are increasingly convinced that the well-being of the present society is no longer based on manufacturing, on things and goods. It's increasingly experiential. And I would like to finish my rather improvisational presentation again quoting one time what Prime Minister told me. He said, you know, I read The Economist magazine recently. It was during the lunch. He was sitting across me, and he said, well, and you know what is the future of economy and what is the future of society? It is those health industry. People will have more time, they will be concerned with health. And those creational things of yours. So I really hope that he has the point. Thank you very much.